Hello, everyone. Joshua Gilliland here, one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. Thank you for joining me for another fun review of The Mandalorian, covering Chapter 7, The Reckoning. With me is Gabby Martin and Thomas Harper. Gabby, Thomas, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty good. I feel like I'm on a winter Star Wars planet right now with the amount of whiteout we have right here, but doing pretty good.
I have gotten completely off of the internet right now to avoid being spoiled for Rise of Skywalker. So I'm glad we have some new Star Wars to talk about before Rise of Skywalker drops on all of us. I will say that I'm considering suing Jon Favreau for intentional infliction of emotional distress as a result of this episode.
Yeah.
I'm not quite over it yet.
We should bring in Deborah Chow as a co-defendant, and I will join you as a co-plaintiff in that. Like, I am all about that IIED suit because it is very true. It meets all the definitions, all the elements. It was very intentional.
And it's well directed, which is why she was given the Kenobi series, because she's one heck of a visual storyteller. Well, let's get into The Reckoning, which is Chapter 7. And it's the Mandalorian putting together his team in order to go confront Grief and the Imperials, and they refer to the Imperials as the Imps. And which it's like, okay, that kind of makes sense. Like in times of war, the opposing side gets nicknames. This was just, I wasn't expecting that. So that was very interesting that they went there. But we have these Imperials running around, and we learned that Navarro was an Imperial stronghold, and the rebellion lost a lot of troops there. It never fell. And the Empire held it until the end of the war. So the fact that we have, this Imperial remnant that's still functional, are they in violation of the Galactic Concordance that ended the Galactic Civil War? And, Thomas, you're probably the lead when it comes to Star Wars trivia. Do you want to kick this off for us?
Yeah, and this is a tricky one because they don't fully explain the legal framework of the galaxy in this show. And in a way, I'm glad that they don't. I really want a legal procedural drama where we get all this, these legislative debates and whatnot. But the Galactic Concordance, like you mentioned, Josh, that's the peace treaty that ended the war. Everybody's knows Jakku and the big battle that happened there. That was sort of the ultimate final battle that happened in the Civil War. There was a lot of mop-up after that, but this peace treaty gets signed in the wake of it. And it doesn't wipe the Empire out completely. The rebels were faced with the choice of waging a decades-long war to clean up every little bit of the Imperial Navy and Imperial Army, and that's wasn't really a good option, a doable option. So they struck a balance, and what this peace treaty did, it didn't wipe out the military, but it did defang the Empire, and it cordoned them off to a section of the core worlds and the inner rim, minus Coruscant. The Empire had to give up Coruscant, the traditional capital. Navarro is not in either of those places, and certainly the Empire that was left at the end of this concordance was not one that had any capability to wage war. And so it begs the two questions. A, was the Galactic Concordance even a valid legal document? Because the person that signed it for the Empire, if you remember from the prequels, the Emperor Palpatine or Chancellor Palpatine's right-hand man, the blue guy, Masameda, he's the last guy left standing after the Emperor dies on the Death Star, and he takes up this ridiculous title in the Emperor's absence, and so he's actually the signatory of this document on behalf of the Empire, and I would kind of argue he didn't have any authority to sign this in the first place. I don't know what the I don't think he's like the U.S. equivalent of the vice president, where he would step up into the emperor's shoes. But I think there's a problem with the legal framework of this peace treaty. But assuming it's valid, I think there's an open question that Moff Gideon and the client are operating way outside the boundaries of it.
Yeah, it makes me think of, you know, the German surrender at the end of World War II, because that was Admiral, was it Dönitz? Was the guy in charge of the German Navy was the guy who, you know, threw in the towel.
Mm-hmm.
And like, imagine Germany having active states under control of like regional governors in places like Argentina or Siberia, or, you know, again, some like far away, remote, isolated places that could be self-sufficient. Siberia wouldn't be one of those, but you get the idea of they could remain in operation. And when we see the Moff show up, all of his troops have clean armor, and he has a smashing, you know, TIE fighter that he arrives in. And it's like, yeah. Gabby, what are your thoughts? Because you did a lot of research on this. Of would like, you know, this regional governor even be subject to the terms of the concordance?
Yeah. So, I mean, it goes back to the idea of whether the document is valid, and I think it goes back to our original debate of what the power structure is in, you know, especially these outer rim areas, because it's like you said, if you have something that's so remote, and I mean, obviously they know, as we know from the first episode, that, you know, the empire has fallen, that, you know, imperial credits are no good, that the new republic is forming, but the new republic's kind of a joke. So it's almost this kind of lawless area, and it's, the issue is, if there is anything to be enforced on them, who's going to enforce it? That's the real issue, is what body, you know, is going to enforce on these kind of outer rim, you know, loyalists, if you will, you know, that are still operating with the same amount of authority they had when the empire was at its height.
This raises the issue with Moff Gideon, and I absolutely love this villain because he doesn't have a British accent. He's different than the other Moffs that we've seen in canon, and he does have a nice swagger about him,
and a nice cape.
And a nice cape. And he had no problem executing other Imperials because he thought they screwed up. So that's telling as well of, you have something I want. Well, could he be classified as a war criminal or brought in on charges of one? And, you know, Thomas, if you want to put on the JAG hat, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
So it's tricky because we don't know anything about Gideon at all. When we talk about the Galactic Concordance, what it did with the existing Imperial military commanders was to say, you've got one option, and that's to throw down your arms and not fight. You don't have to be a member of our team, but you can't keep fighting. And those that refuse to do so, so the folks that went off into the unknown regions and you know, laid the seeds of the First Order, they were all uniformly declared war criminals. And the concept here is a little bit funny, and it's funny in real life too, not like a haha way, but just sort of like a legal quirk, because it begs the question, like, what gives the what gives the rebels the authority to declare that, right? It's a bit of victor's justice, and that's sort of how it goes historically, right? In the wake of World War II, the Nazis lose, Japan loses, and who sets the rules and gets to decide who is and isn't a war criminal as far as accusations go? Well, it's the Allies. You know, they ultimately choose to give some measure of due process for those folks, but to the victor go the spoils, and to the new republic goes the legal authority, so to speak, of being able to declare who's who. And so, absent some other authority there, I think Gideon is going to be outside the bounds of this treaty that the Empire has agreed to, and he's going to have a mark on his back as he continues hostilities. And Josh, you've mentioned this in probably other podcasts, not the Mandalorian podcast, but there is a war crime, like a crime against peace, just the crime of breaching peace effectively. And if, I don't know what else Gideon is doing other than trying to hunt down a baby, which seems pretty bad. But, certainly he's got military forces under his command. So at the very least, he could be brought up on those charges.
It'll be interesting to see what the final episode brings with him, because his troops looked well maintained. The TIE fighter looked not just operational, but again, shiny, new, well maintained,
Yeah.
which means that there's sources of funding, that he could still have an operational, regional government. And if that's the case, are they just fascists? Which would be a horrible place to live, but are they committing, war crimes? Like that's an interesting question. Wouldn't want to live in that neighborhood. And again, the fact that he basically ordered an extrajudicial execution of the client and 8 other stormtroopers, that's not good. I mean, that's not a good sign and indication of how he runs the show. I mean, it's very Tarkin-esque. If Tarkin was just a little bit more moody and just bumping people off. I mean, it's more Vader-like with the Force choking.
Yeah.
So I like having a good bad guy, and he's truly bad. Well, let's get into the issue of blurgs. And I don't know about you two, but I would like a blurg now. I would love her and raise her and take good care of her. That they look fun.
Like riding through the drive-through at McDonald's on your blurg. I'll have a hamburger and a Big Mac for my girl here.
Yeah. Can we call back the days of like 90s, early 2000s marketing where they would just randomly, have somebody pull up to McDonald's on a blurg to market the Mandalorian? That's the kind of marketing I want right now.
They are awesome, and taking them from their home planet, and I thought we learned the name of that, something 7, to Navarro, which is a very western type name. So again, I really do like leaning into the Western issue. This raises the issue of you're importing an animal from one planet to another planet. We have rules against wild animals being imported into the United States from other countries. Other countries have the same thing. It raises issues of, is a blurg a wild animal or domestic? Because it can be domesticated, and we've seen them in the Clone Wars on Ryloth. But elephants, people can ride elephants. That doesn't mean that it's a domesticated animal. That's still going to be viewed as a wild animal. Gabby, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I did a bit of a deep dive into this. I didn't know all the kinds of importation rules to animals, and specifically I kind of viewed the blurg as a type of equidae, which is a horse, a type of horse. It can be horses, donkeys, anything basically, zebras. There's apparently a whole host of hybrids of these types of equidae. So if you're interested, but yeah, so the first thing you would need if we're considering, interplanet or planetary to planet importation as kind of a more international importation and exportation, as opposed to, crossing state lines. You would definitely need a certificate of veterinary inspection, or CVI, which is generally required or in some form by authorities, regardless of the country you're entering, at the arrival destination. This is a document signed by a veterinarian, that says the animal is free of diseases, that they're healthy, and if they're not healthy, what they're, diagnosed with. And it prevents diseased animals from freely being transported into the country without, authorities being aware of it. And if you are traveling internationally, the CVI is usually required to have a federal endorsement, which would be done through the Veterinary Service Office of the USDA Animal Health Inspection Service, which is a thing. And then you may also be required, since you are moving, animals are considered cargo. So you're importing and exporting cargo the same you would with shirts or any type of personal property. So an import permit may be required. And specifically when you're transporting animals, designated ports have to be used. You can't just kind of roll up to, take a boat into a harbor and pop off with your horse. Like, you can't just do that. You have to go through specifically with horses, you have to go through specific quarantine stations, and you have to make reservations in advance. And there are actually, here in the United States, there are actually federal and private quarantine facilities at all major ports of air, sea, and land entry. So on our East Coast, our West Coast, our southern border, and anywhere you would fly into the country, New York, Washington, all of those types of places. And that way they can quarantine horses that are diseased and prevent them from being spread throughout the country. So
you would think, with the way what we've seen of Blurgs, especially in that first episode where the Mando gets actually attacked by them, that planets would have, or the New Republic in general would have, an interest in these sort of laws, because you bring a creature like that onto your planet, it starts to breed, maybe interbreed, as weird as that probably is with some other creatures, and all of a sudden you got a pack of wild Blurgs running around that are charging at people, and all of a sudden making life there on Navarro kind of a living hell. And so the way around that, the way to prevent that in part, is to have regulations like this.
Yeah, we don't need Blurgs and dewbacks interbreeding and
a blueback, a dew Blurg.
Would have 4 legs, will it have the little hands? Like, what's the dominant DNA? Yeah. Well, we're lawyers, we don't do that kind of work here, so we'll defer to our friends over in the medical profession for that analysis of what that hybrid would look like. Yeah. But on that note, let's talk about Navarro, which is, again, former Imperial stronghold, and it's turning back into an Imperial stronghold, and we have the beat-up-looking stormtroopers in force there. And it looks like a form of martial law. Gabby, what are your thoughts on what's going on?
Well, I think one of the things is that, they even say it in the beginning. I believe when Mando goes to see Cara Dune, that, they've taken kind of despotic rule over the place. So this is clearly some sort of, direct military control of the normal civilian functions, if there were any normal civilian functions on this planet. It does seem, as when we see it before, if it wasn't necessarily under martial law, that, it's kind of an outpost town. Really, the Bounty Hunters Guild are the only people that really seem to have a presence, and the Mandalorian, clan has a presence there. But it really seems like this outpost. So if there was any authority, it got taken over by this Imperial remnant, which theoretically sent in additional forces and kind of took over when the safe house was attacked. So, you do see martial law kind of arise when there is some sort of igniting disaster or seemingly igniting disaster that an authority figure and a figure in power can seize upon and implement martial law as kind of a way to bring peace and that kind of stuff.
You normally see it tied at the hip with governmental authorities. I mean, martial law has various incarnations across the world, and not every country implements it in exactly the fairest way. I think, Pakistan is a great example of a country that if it happens to be convenient for the army's leader, they'll just declare martial law, invalidate the constitution, suspend it, and the military takes control. And I think the better part of that country's history has been under some form of military control and arguably some form of pseudo martial law at least. But always the common thread from place to place is this authority that you talk about, Gabby, that there's some semblance of governmental authority that gives the military or whatever element is declaring martial law the ability to enforce this. Here in the U.S., it's not absolutely unheard of that martial law is declared, but it's exceptionally rare. I mean, the suspension of something like as huge as habeas corpus is a really, really big deal. So here, I think you would have to have sort of a 9/11 or style emergency or something on the order of a really large storm, hurricane or something like that to see any form of this, because it is a big deal when the military takes control of civil functions. I wonder whether Navarro is under anybody's authority, whether it's so far out there and such a backwater that the New Republic doesn't really, certainly Navarro doesn't seem to have a central government. So there's nobody to say, hey, we're going to be new members of the New Republic. And you have this vacuum there. So, I don't think the client has any tangible legal authority to declare it, but he's filling a vacuum there. And, at the end of the day, who's going to stop him other than apparently Moff Gideon, another bad guy with bigger guns?
Yeah, I did some research on this for after Godzilla 2014, and our experiments when we've had martial law, fall into San Francisco 1906 earthquake. That martial law was declared because there was looting, there was bad things happening, and there was an order from the mayor that looters would be shot. Or Civil War, there were incidents during the Civil War. Hawaii was under martial law, I think, until 1943, after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And that went up to the Supreme Court because they basically kept martial law in force for too long. It's like martial law is permissible, at least in our view of the world, if there's a massive incident and government can't function because of said incident. On the World War II example, like the courts were open, governments were open, local governments were open. There was no reason to have martial law still in force. So like the case where somebody was arrested, and I don't remember all the details with it, but it was like, hey, we're done. Like, it's time for this to end. And when we look at what's happening in Navarro, this is more like pure military rule of might makes right, and we're in charge now because we want this child.
I like that they have clearly the top end Imperial remnant forces there, most notably the speeder bike scout who offers $20. What I like to think of as $20, if he's talking about Imperial credits, maybe it's more like $9 for Mando's helmet. And Mando looks like he wants to just flamethrower the guy right there for just even suggesting it.
Yeah, there's the scenes in Navarro where we see the troop transport pull up. Favreau had to have one of those as a kid.
Yeah.
And this is another episode of, I had one of these. It was come up by Kenner. It was never on screen. Filoni put it into Rebels. By God, I'm doing the first live action one of these things, and it's going to pour out troops. And guys from the 501st having to gay old time getting to play extras. So that's just awesome. But we now have this issue with Grief, and there's a contract. There's an offer that's the hologram, and then there's performance, and there are legitimate contract formation questions here. And Gabby, you did a lot of research on this. Could you illuminate us with your findings?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have a very kind of stereotypical offer when Grief sends him the hologram. And, he says, if you want, to make peace, come to Navarro, like, we can settle this. You get what you want. I get what I want. Like, we'll be good. So it seems that acceptance based on that offer, acceptance of the offer is Mando going to Navarro, right? So Mando clearly accepts the contract. I mean, obviously with a bit of an asterisk, because he does a little, detour to go pick up enforcements, as Grief calls them.
Subcontractors.
Yes, subcontractors. So there's the offer. Mando accepts it when he and his crew arrive on Navarro, and then theoretically the performance would be, this whole plan that they've hatched out, that, they're going to go in, pretend that they're going to give up the child. Mando kills the client, and then, everything's kind of fine. But what was withheld the entire time was that Grief never intended for Mando or his crew to survive, that they were just going to kill them, take the child, and, be done with it. That they were basically trying to pull a fast one on him. And after Baby Yoda heals him, Grief has a change of heart, and he reveals this whole plan. But technically that makes the whole offer, acceptance, and even the future performance void, because there was never really a contract. At least one half of the party never intended to perform to uphold the contract in the first place. I mean, he intended to kill him and have this whole other plan in place. So I think you're spot on in the notes that, this was void from the get-go. Like, this was not any sort of enforceable contract.
When we're right back to a point that Josh brought up probably in our very first episode breakdown, which is, what are they even contracting about here? It's the killing of a poor old man in a bar. No, I mean, whether he's an Imperial or just a bad guy in general or not, they're contracting over killing this guy. So I think from a public policy standpoint, this contract, even if it met all the other marks, is what they would call void ab initio. So just void from the get-go. It's as if it never existed, because you can't contract to kill people.
That's all it is. I mean, the person who's being killed changes depending on which person you're talking about. Grief and his guild crew versus who Mando thinks is being, is the target of this murder for hire plot. But it's murder for hire. That's basically what everybody is there to do, is to kill at least one person. So yeah, I think it's void from the get-go because there's this whole other thing, and it's void on public policy grounds.
It takes self-defense to a real illogical conclusion, because from a self-defense standpoint, you would need to say that the child's constantly in danger and that the danger is unending.
Which he is, and it is.
It is. Is it?
I am the guardian ad litem for Baby Yoda, just putting it out there. Like, I have self-appointed myself as his guardian ad litem.
I'll allow it.
Representative, yeah.
Put the blaster down. Put the blaster down. So there's that issue. Courts don't look at self-defense that way. A nation could, with going, hey, this is a problem. We're at war, so we're going to do a drone strike to take out the leadership of those who want to do us harm. Like, we do that. We've done that for now we're now entering the third presidential administration that's done that. Private parties don't do that, and that's a problem when looking at this. So,
well, don't do that legally. We should say.
Yeah,
Can't do that legally. Get away with it.
No, it is. I mean, there's an argument to be made, but it's not a good one, and it just going like, well, it's totally lawless, so therefore we're gonna just make a plan to kill this dude, and hopefully his henchmen decide to switch sides in order to get a paycheck. That's a very dangerous plan. It'd almost be better if it was, hey, we're just going to take him out. Yeah, it's still murder for hire, but it's at least it's different sounding as opposed to there are a bunch of contingencies that have to happen in order for this thing to work. So let's talk about what Cara Dune does in her free time to make some extra cash with the Sorgan Fight Club. And yeah, I that lady could certainly break all my ribs, so I wouldn't want her mad at me. But it's like when you have somebody who's this champion fighter, yeah, you're gonna have her show off, and it's a great choreographed fight. But let's talk about Sorgan Fight Club against that's looked like somebody from Dathomir, same species as Darth Maul.
Zabrak, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I also like, this may be me, and I haven't, because we're doing a very fast turnaround on this. But I may be the only one who thought that was a cameo by Ray Park, the actor who played Darth Maul. Like, I don't know why there's a shot of his face and it looks like Ray Park. And like, I would see them putting the horns on his head as like an homage to Darth Maul. And especially with Rise of Skywalker coming out, I can see that. Like, I don't know. That was just me.
If he is the ultimate player of that species on screen, at least.
Yeah.
That would be very fitting.
Yeah.
Now you make me want to go back and watch it and like pause and zoom in obsessively.
I watched through the credits. I've searched Reddit. Like, please, somebody confirm that I'm not crazy and that was Ray Park. That was totally cameo. Because I mean, who else would they put against Cara Dune as far as fight choreography? I mean,
yeah,
really, there's no one else, and that was a pretty solid fight going on. So,
well, from a very technical legal standpoint, the first and the second legal rule about the Sorgan Fight Club is that you do not talk about the Sorgan Fight Club. Mm-hmm. So with that legal analysis concluded, we can move on. I'm just kidding.
We'll
two things.
We talk about the gambling laws.
That's true.
Because that way we don't get into the rules of Fight Club and the laws of Fight Club, because that would not be
tap dance around it. Well, I think for the fighting itself, two things sort of stood out for me. One, the fact that this is in a bar raises questions about liability for the bar owner. And this sort of splits into two different avenues. One, assuming that you're either one of the two fighters, so the Zabrak or Cara Dune, or you're just a spectator watching this happen, and they don't exactly have a ring built. They're just sort of fighting in the middle of they just drag the tables out of the way. Like, okay, here you go. But if you're somebody at the bar there or a fighter and you get hurt either participating in or watching this fight, do you have some sort of tort claim, negligence or assault and battery, something like that? And it made me think about some of the lawsuits I recall studying back in law school during torts about NFL players that have sued the NFL mm-hmm. over injuries sustained on the field. And, the idea behind defeating their liability or nixing the NFL's liability for injuries is that the concept that you knowingly exposed yourself to this danger. So certainly a boxer can't sue his opponent for being knocked out and losing a tooth. no more than he can sue the arena or anything like that, because he knows the risks. The law expects you to size those up, right? So certainly the fighters couldn't do that. And I think from the audience's standpoint, they're in the same boat. They voluntarily chose to stand by this dangerous fight with two very large beings beating the crap out of each other. And the fact that you might get hurt, I don't think you're going to have a legal claim against the bar owner. Likewise, any place that serves alcohol has to be careful in a number of states that have what are called dram shop rules. And this is a huge liability for bars and places like that, because what a dram shop rule is that if you are a place that serves alcohol and you continue serving alcohol to someone you know to be intoxicated, or you should know is overly intoxicated, you are strictly liable for any injuries that person causes. Here, I don't know that it doesn't seem like either of the fighters are drunk. The Zabrak definitely could be drunk. I don't know, but Cara Dune seems like she's pretty sober and just getting drunk on ass kicking. But like if, say a patron there had been overserved, gets upset that he lost all his money betting on the fight and starts beating up people, or drunkenly crashes his speeder into somebody, a dram shop law would extend liability to that bartender. And that, when you see lawsuits about this stuff using dram shop rules, that's the first target, because that drunken person probably doesn't have deep pockets, but that business probably does.
Yep, and having personally done a lot of PI work and plaintiff's PI work, anytime there's any indication that the other party may have been drunk or served alcohol, whether it's an auto accident or any sort of altercation, you always, especially here in Connecticut, we do have dram shop rules, and you always go after the bar, because the bar has not just deeper pockets, but has probably a bigger insurance. So definitely, and given that lady was so like the waitress from the last time we saw that particular cantina, was so willing to just like do anything she was handed cash for, and just like throw things in. She's like, sure, I'll give you a tankard of whatever. I bet that woman has had a lot of dram shop and dram shop lawsuits. So that bar needs to reassess its risk policy, and probably not the best place to have a fight club.
Just you really don't like Alice. There's
nope. She's a very problematic figure for me.
Clearly, rubbed you the wrong way. Well, let's talk about Cara Dune and the fact that she apparently has some outstanding warrants. Mm-hmm. That if her chain code is run, which is sounding more like ID or social security number, it's a form of identification. Mm-hmm. That she could spend the rest of her life in a prison cell. Like, what did she do? And Thomas, why don't you talk about the military side of this, and let's go from there.
Well, we talked before in episode 3 about what her deal might be, and I speculated that perhaps she had not defected from the rebellion, because she clearly has a deep loyalty there, as we see in this episode, but perhaps she deserted. She just got tired of doing whatever kind of mop-up jobs that she was doing that wasn't what she quote-unquote signed up for, and she just walked. And assuming she wasn't done with whatever her service obligation was, being absent without leave, or certainly leaving in that way, deserting your post, would be a crime in and of itself. And the problem with that crime, which I mentioned before, is that the Rebel Alliance military would not lose jurisdiction over her. So the moment that she got brought back into custody, she could be subject to court-martial. So you see this all the time where, I think a few years ago, there was a Korean War veteran that had defected to the North Koreans. Technically speaking, if he were brought back into custody, he could be forced to get into a uniform, even in his 80s or however old he was, and made to face a court-martial. This episode sort of clarifies it. I don't know, it certainly doesn't rule out that she could have deserted, but it seems like her life choices after military service are what have caused her problems. And I wonder whether she's been taking non-guild jobs that have caused her to A, make use of her unique skill set, and B, in a way that probably violates the law. Because she doesn't specifically say the New Republic military is after her, just that the New Republic is. So certainly if she's this rogue vigilante, she's like the Star Wars version of Steven Seagal at this point. Like her fists are registered weapons. It could be all sorts of things. We see a definite delineation between guild and non-guild, and the non-guild jobs seem to be the sketchy, murdery ones. Maybe those are what she's taking.
Well, I think I kind of had a different take. I mean, because she mentions multiple crimes, not just one crime of desertion. So, and I think what you really see in this episode that you didn't see in episode 3, apart from the ending where she could have easily, realizing that there was a bounty on the child, could have easily like scooped him up and, left town. And I think what we're seeing is that she and Keel, whatever, have very strong moral codes, just like the Mandalorian, which is why he chooses them as trusted companions. And I think she has a very strong moral compass. And what might have happened with her is that she not only deserted for a difference in ideology, but may have defended somebody, because we see that just like Queel, she's very quick to defend the child, to defend Baby Yoda, and she's very quick to defend others. So I think she may have defended, an innocent civilian or innocent, whoever, in one of these mop-up jobs, that she felt that what they were doing was in the wrong, and maybe turned her weapon on people, rebels, other shock troopers that she was meant to serve alongside with. So I can see that being her background, as far as not just deserting, but also having committed a crime against her fellow shock troopers, which caused her to go on the run. And I can see her, laying low in these kind of backwater towns, just doing her Fight Club thing. Because she seems to believe that the minute her name gets on, her chain code gets run by anything, she's gonna a beacon's gonna go up and she's gonna get arrested, and she's gonna have a heavy, kind of price on her head. So I can see her doing a major crime in addition to her desertion against the kind of military.
Yeah. And that could tie in, you bring up a good point about her possible backstory there, because there's this whole back and forth that she has multiple times about covering up her arm tattoo, and how it'll get everybody's hackles up and whatnot. Well, nobody ever says anything about the Rebel logo, the Starbird logo she has tattooed on her cheek. So I really wonder whether that tattoo, as being emblematic of a jump trooper, means that her unit was notorious for doing nasty stuff to Imperials, or perhaps it's each one of those individual bars on the tattoo going around like signifies an Imperial killed or something like that, to the point where it's sort of it's a mark of pride, I guess, internally, but it's kind of an infamous one that maybe she's not as proud of. Yeah. Who knows?
Eventually we'll find out, because this is only the second time that we've seen her.
True.
Well, let's talk about one other thing with her. She refers to the child as a thing now, and that's a change in personality from when we saw her in the fourth episode, where she referred to the child as he. Yeah. So that was just weird. Get that thing out of here. Is that thing okay up there? That was just different, and I don't know what caused that. But we do have an issue with a minor driving a car type situation, which is raises a huge issue with parental liability, and yeah, Gabby, I think you did a little of that. So.
First off, I should say that I feel completely vindicated for assuring you both that Baby Yoda was not okay being left in the crest on his own, because clearly this kid knows how to operate the vehicle badly, but he knows how to press buttons. So he should not be left alone in a vehicle. Because this is what happens. If he gets left alone by the controls, he takes over the vehicle, and causes, destruction and flips them around the crest. And so, yes, as both civilly, parents are liable for injuries. If your kid is unlicensed, does not have a learner's permit, that's a whole another ball of wax of issues of, violating the conditions of the learner's permit. But if your kid is, say, 13 or 10 or whatever, that wouldn't be able to get a learner's permit, and they're operating a motor vehicle, this is any injuries, if they get into a crash or what have you, the parents are liable for the injuries caused. So in Arizona specifically, an owner of a motor vehicle who causes or knowingly permits an unlicensed minor, which here Mando clearly knowingly permitted the kid to be around all these buttons, to drive a vehicle on a highway, is liable along with the minor for damages caused by the negligence or willful misconduct of the minor driving the vehicle. So yeah, Mando's in a heck of a lot of liability for letting Baby Yoda near shiny controls.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about IG-11, and I feel vindicated because I raised the idea that Krell would fix IG-11 and that we would see him again. And so,
I'm so glad that you were right about this point, I might add.
Me too. I was like, oh, thank God, we get to see him again. So this raises the issue of, okay, was IG-11 a person? Was IG-11 lost property? Or was IG-11 abandoned property? Yeah, because if he's lost, like there could be a duty to like turn it over for, the person who, the true owner to come find it. Is he abandoned? Well, that raises other issues. And there could be an issue with salvage rights from the Charter of the New Republic. And Gabby, did you do the deep dive on this?
Yeah, so I had a wonderful flashback to my property class, and the one thing they stress in property class that you'll hear over and over again in law school is that the law favors the using owner, right? The non-sleeping owner. If the owner is sleeping, whether it's real property or personal property, the law doesn't like that. They don't like property to just kind of sit there and not be used. So if at common law, and this has been it's codified in different state statutes, is a person who finds abandoned property, which this is talking about personal property, not necessarily real property, which is its own set of rules and regulations. If a person finds abandoned property, they may claim it. They have to, first take definite steps to show their claim, which I think you have that here with Queel taking IG-11, restoring him, and not just restoring him to power, but changing his function. Right now, he's no longer an assassination droid. He's now, a caretaking droid and a protection droid. So, and he's clearly put a lot of time and effort to fixing IG-11, retraining him, reprogramming him. So courts, when they're looking at who to grant possession of abandoned property to or mislaid property, they'll look to the type of item, where it was found, and to determine whether the finder has a right to the item. So in general, the items will go to, the abandoned item will go to the finder, unless the find was made at a particular location. So you could imagine in this scenario, if the person who hired IG-11 was at that compound, which wouldn't necessarily make sense since IG-11 was there to take property from the compound, that there would be a claim, more of a mislaid property item. But with lost property, you also have the obligation to turn, to try to attempt to find the owner, which doesn't seem to be the case here. But we also see from Queel's planet that he seems to be the only person there besides the Blurgs and this, very mysterious compound. So I don't know if there was any real sort of authority figure for him to kind of report the, abandoned droid to and say, hey, can you find the owner? I think he was totally, within his rights to kind of secure it, reprogram it, and use it.
And Josh, to your point, as you set this issue up, there's a really kind of unique juxtaposition in issues here. In how Queel views IG-11, which I think triggers Gabby's analysis. Queel clearly thinks that this is just a piece of property. He's laid claim to it under, whatever the Charter of the New Republic is.
He has spoken.
Exactly. It's a piece of, stuff that he's able to program how he wants. I don't think IG-11 sees himself that way. We don't have a ton of examples in the Star Wars universe about, quote unquote, liberated droids, but certainly we know of another similar model, IG-88, that had liberated himself from the programming, his programming. Forlom, the other droid bounty hunter that you see on the deck of Vader's Superstar Destroyer in Empire Strikes Back, similarly kind of like freed himself from his programming and staked out on his own. L3 from Solo. These are all droid characters that I don't think fit the neat bill of property. But of course, the very pragmatic Ugnaught is going to see him that way.
Yeah, a lot to unpack, or even Zero last episode.
Yeah, exactly.
There's the wonderful quote about droids in this episode, where it's droids are a reflection of a neutral reflection of those who treat them. And I thought that was accurate, that he's nurturing and a father figure to IG-11 and teaching him to walk again, teaching him basic motor skills, versus somebody who like Han Solo, not necessarily known for being nice to C-3PO.
The understatement of the millennium.
Granted, there are reasons when you continually walk in on when you're trying to make a move on Leia, but still, that's not a reason to be that much of a schmuck. Luke, who's actually very good to the droids, because the Skywalkers are historically good to droids. So a lot there. Well, which brings us to Mando's distrust of the droids. And again, a lot to unpack of this propensity. It's a character trait to not like droids. And Gabby, what are your thoughts on that and breaking in some rules of evidence?
Yeah, so I actually saw the propensity going the other way. So the way Mando treats IG-11 is very much the thinking that courts are trying to avoid having juries have with any sort of character or propensity evidence. So the idea is that propensity evidence is the idea of once a criminal, always a criminal, which is very much where Mando's head is in this episode, that he's like, IG-11 tried to kill the baby once, he's going to try to kill him again. Like that he just, and he specifically tells Kara that because she says, you just dislike droids. You have a thing against droids. And he says, no, I have a thing against that droid. And his thing is very much, he tried to kill him once, he's gonna try to kill him again, no matter how much programming has been done. You know, this very anti-rehabilitation point of view. And so it's interesting, Josh, that the quote that you mentioned right before that, Quill says that droids are neither good nor bad, or neither good nor evil. And that's really, you know, when you have especially criminal trials, it doesn't matter how, you know, the person could have committed a crime every week of their life. That has no bearing on the trial at hand. The trial at hand is to see whether they committed the crime of which they are being accused. So, you know, propensity evidence, which is currently codified, or the prohibition of propensity evidence, which is currently codified in Federal Rules of Evidence 404, which states that evidence of a person's character or character trait is not admissible to prove that on a particular occasion the person acted in accordance with the character or trait. So if IG-11 did something sketchy, you know, or was accused of something later on, Mando couldn't bring up the fact that he had tried to assassinate Baby Yoda in the past. That could not be used against him. The fact that he acted one way at one time cannot be used against him now. There are a few exceptions, such as when a pertinent trait is brought into issue, but that would still be subject to things like the rape shield rule and the 403 balancing test. And in homicide cases, prosecutors can offer evidence of victim's peacefulness if the defendant offers evidence that the victim was the first aggressor. But very rarely does propensity evidence get in because of that tendency to prejudice the jury, to get the jury thinking that because they acted one way at one time, that they clearly are guilty in this case.
Well, Baby Yoda's propensity for peacefulness went right out the window in this episode.
Well, he's clearly sees the Mandalorian as a father figure, and thought he was coming to his father's defense. So that's my thought about what happens with Baby Yoda showing the ability to force choke Cara Dune. And well, let's talk about, you know, capacity. Could this 50-year-old infant be tried as an adult? And Thomas, you're a dad. What's your thoughts?
50 is a grown-ass man in this galaxy. There, I look at, I have an 18-month-old, so it's eerie every week how much Baby Yoda resembles my daughter in like some of the stuff that he does. Like my daughter would have absolutely pushed every button on the Razor Crest's panel and like thrown that ship into the ground. But what's interesting here, I was talking with somebody else and they pointed out that maybe Baby Yoda was just trying to cheat or to help Mando win the arm wrestling match and not so much actually hurt or kill Cara Dune. But I think either way, you have a serious capacity issue, because no matter what your knowledge of this child's age is or the overall development, it's clear that it's at best a toddler, if not infantile. And courts naturally delineate between how you are treated legally in terms of your mental capacity and your responsibility for a crime based on your age. And I don't know of any case where a child that, you know, between the ages of say 0 and 3 or 4 has been found mentally responsible for like attempted murder or something like that. And the problem here comes, like, can that child form the mens rea can that child form the requisite mental element? Here, I think you can make the argument that to the extent Baby Yoda understood anything, he thought that his dad, his space dad, was in trouble, was getting hurt. And then you run into the sticky wicket of self-defense. I don't even think you get to that question, though, because I don't think there's a court in this country, in this galaxy, that's going to hold Baby Yoda mentally responsible. Also, I don't think from a practical standpoint, if you are the prosecutor that's trying to charge Baby Yoda with something, there are going to be riots in the street to rival anything from Rodney King and beyond. You're going to be public enemy number one.
Yeah, the DA in Miracle on 34th Street, like, it's just not gonna sleeping on the sofa. It's not ending well for you. But it does raise the interesting question of tort liability for parents of things that a child does. Mm-hmm. And in California, we actually have one of the largest return damage limits of, like, if a kid does damage to something. Some states tap out at $5,000, somewhere at $2,000. California's at $25,000. Yeah, so swing for the fences here. Again, we're in the state where middle class is making $200,000 a year, so maybe it's just proportional.
What's that equate to in Imperial credits?
I'm not sure what it could be in coaxium, let alone Imperial credits, but it's a lot is probably the right answer. You'd live very, very well on Navarro. That aside, let's Gabby, what are your thoughts on Mandalorian's tort liability? Because he does say no, she's a friend, really fast. He goes full dad.
Yeah.
Super quick.
Yeah.
We do not force choke in this household.
No.
So I think, the important thing with tort liability as opposed to criminal liability is the idea that Kara would have to bring a suit, right? She'd have to sue for damages of her injuries and any, medical expenses she had arising from her injuries. If those injuries then did not get healed by Baby Yoda as his apology. But yes, Mandu as the guardian of Baby Yoda has a duty, specifically under the Restatement Third of Torts. The duty is now of reasonable care to others, that the actor in a special relationship with another owes a duty of responsible care to reasonable care to third persons with regards to risks posed to the other that arise within the scope of that relationship. So it's a duty of reasonable care. It depends on, that's just from the restatement, which isn't necessarily codified anywhere. Here in Connecticut, it's an absolute liability. Parents are liable for the torts of unemancipated minors, where the minor willfully and maliciously damages property or injures any person. In such cases, the parent would be jointly and severally liable with the minor, and up to $5,000. We have a much lower cap here. So again, the key issue here would be, as Thomas said earlier, proving that kind of willful and malicious element, because how willful and malicious can a toddler act? You'd have to prove clearly there was injury, but was it willful and malicious? That would be another element. But with this type of absolute liability statute like we have here, no negligence needs to be shown. So the card would not have to demonstrate that Mando's parenting skills suck, that he has no kind of real you know, parenting authority or, you know, no real kind of good parenting skills with regards to Baby Yoda, she wouldn't need to prove any of that. You know, as long as she can prove that Baby Yoda's liable, triggers Mando's liability as his guardian.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Of course, here's a fun one. This is the first time we've seen force healing on screen. I don't think we've ever seen it in the any animated series. It's first time. Does Griff owe Baby Yoda a life debt now?
I would say he does. I mean, you know, clearly, if not some sort of life debt, he clearly has changed his tune with regards to protecting Baby Yoda. He clearly feels that there's kind of some quid pro quo, to be quite topical. But he feels that, you know, Baby Yoda saved him from this poisonous death. And now he, in return, saves Baby Yoda and his space dad by killing the 2 bounty hunters that he had initially ordered to kill Mando. So I think there's, at the lowest kind of bar, there's a quid pro quo, and I think depending on how things roll out in the next episode, it could be all the way up to a life debt, if he feels that strongly about it.
Yeah, you when you're about to die horribly from a poisonous venom, and in the most ironic way possible, with nothing can go wrong now. It's like, well, that's never say that. Smooth sailing from here. No. Nope. No. No, I do it. For me, this does highlight, I do love Carl Weathers. I'm the Gen Xer that it's just, I see Apollo and I'm just grateful to see him having a ball. I could have done without the line of, is he going to eat me? I could have done without that. I thought that was hokey and weird. We didn't need that. That aside, it was adorable.
I thought he was going to end up like Chubbs in Happy Gilmore and lose another hand. Damn dragon bit my hand off. And then for the rest of the episodes that he's in, it just like comically gets knocked off and he has to go chase down his little wooden hand. Don't worry, it's real sturdy.
We're gonna have to amputate. That would have been.
He could have used the leftover Beskar to make his
He's like Jamie Lannister at that point.
That would have been the best Happy Gilmore callback if they went there. It was like was it Vin Diesel, the critic, or was it Night or Dark or
no? Oh man, I know exactly what you're. Pitch Black.
Pitch Black.
Yes.
It reminded me of that with how it was shot. That we really don't get a good look at these beasts that are flying around that can pick up a blurg that
really put a fine point on it.
Like, oh, everyone's fair game here if it can fly away with a blurg. And yeah.
I don't know. To me, this I couldn't help, especially the second time I watched it. It seemed like a really deep cut of the writers commenting on some sort of competition with Game of Thrones, because it seemed like way too Game of Thrones for a Star Wars universe. I was like, what do we have, dragons now? Like, what is this? Because they seem way too dragon-like for they, made dragon sounds, they flapped like a dragon, they, the whole thing. So that was my commentary on it, that it was some, sort of competition.
Shots were fired.
Well, look, we can do a dark episode and it's better. Ha, 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 ha. checkmate. You got fired from the Star Wars trilogy. Ha ha ha. Yeah, it's yeah, we know what we're doing. Yeah, take that. So lots of fun there. Now let's get into the issue of the comm links, because there's a question of the stormtroopers listening in, and I think that's because Queel had an old Imperial comm link, and they probably should have put it on a different channel. That like, this is really bad luck that the Imperials are operating on the same frequency, but it does get into some electronic surveillance issues. And I'm going to take a stab at Gabby. You were the one who thought about this issue in great detail.
Yes, because I actually went back through my Crim Pro outline from my days in law school. Shout out to Professor Kraus. Hopefully he is a nerdy guy and he's listening to this podcast. So thank you. Hopefully I get it right and he doesn't come find me. But yeah, so this was very much, I mean, Josh, your explanation was probably the more reasonable one, that they were on the same frequency. I also was thinking of this Chris Hallmark movie I had seen the other day where somebody turned somebody's microphone on and their bad plot, got yelled to all the people and they were outed as the bad guy.
And at the end, did the woman leave her high-paying job in the city to go move back to the small town and run the post office or
something like that, like that. So, good. That was what was in my mind. But then I was like, no, think like a lawyer and think that they actually, somehow magically wiretap their phones in the 5 seconds that they had interacted with them. And so electronic surveillance is a huge thing. And does need a warrant. It's defined as the non-consensual acquisition of electronic or other surveillance device of the contents of any wire or electronic communication under circumstances in which a party to the communication has a reasonable expectation of privacy. So initially, up until 1967, there was a case called Olmsted, which said that the government could intercept phone conversations or electronic communications because they weren't entering the defendant's home and conversations weren't tangible things. Then a case comes along called Katz, which held that the Fourth Amendment protects any place where an individual has a reasonable expectation of privacy. So now under Katz, the idea is that people have an objective, reasonable expectation of privacy, i.e. a wiretap of a phone booth, which was the issue in Katz, is illegal because a person who's in a phone booth has a reasonable expectation of that the words they're saying into the phone are not going to get, blasted to the entire universe. And as my professor said, the only person standing outside the phone booth who would be able to understand them or intercept their conversation would be somebody who reads lips, which you don't assume that there's some rando out there when you're in a phone booth that reads lips. So then more kind of on point, you actually have a deep Star Wars reference in another case from 2001 called Kylo v. US, which says that, the court addressed the constitutionality of using technology to survey the inside of a defendant's home. And the court found that physical invasion is not required to constitute a Fourth Amendment search if the surveillance reaped would not have been attainable without entering the home. So again, this idea that people have an objective, reasonable expectation of privacy. And so I think under this definition, and Harlan in his concurrence states that the reasonable expectation of privacy has to be one that society is prepared to recognize as reasonable, right? So we're not going to kind of be going way outside the realms here, but certainly you would think that Mando and Queel, and especially Mando in this case, would have a reasonable expectation that what he's communicating to Queel is private, that this is a private comlink that is not getting tapped. So because there's that reasonable expectation of privacy, triggers all of the Fourth Amendment warrant requirements. So the stormtroopers would need to obtain a warrant, and they would need to show that probable cause is there to believe that search is justified, to describe the situation, why they need the evidence, to provide the time period for surveillance, and clearly none of that happens unless stormtroopers can just kind of magically pull warrants out of the air. So the other issue, kind of circling back to our first topic, is how would martial rule play into this, right? This is clearly, Navarro is clearly an area that never really had, after the fall of the empire, never really had any sort of government or any sort of legal structure, and now is under this kind of imperial remnant rule martial law. Do they really need a warrant? If they don't get a warrant and the search is technically illegal, who does Mando complain to? Clearly he's being shot at, so he really doesn't have time to go complain about the illegality of the search.
And I wonder whether, because when the biker scouts get this communication, it doesn't seem like they're just monitoring comm traffic. They almost sort of are surprised by it. And I wonder if this is almost like, it doesn't seem like it's an encrypted comm links, sort of like we see in Resistance. So is this more like using a walkie-talkie where, it's a stretch to say that you have an expectation of privacy when you're operating on open frequencies like that they could literally be used by anybody. And then I guess by extension, if these are old surplus Imperial comm links, then that the Imperials use this frequency, and it would be hard to argue that you have an expectation of privacy operating on their network using their equipment, that they wouldn't then listen. That almost be like, talking via, on a police radio or something like that, and saying, well, I didn't know the police were going to be listening in on this.
Well, it's like CB or
Yeah.
single sideband or
Yeah.
a marine radio that you're on a channel and maybe you should pick a different channel.
Right.
And so I don't see an expectation of privacy here.
But the thing that I can't wrap my head around, though, that does seem the logical argument. What I can't understand is why, because it wasn't like the comlink was given, in the heat of the moment, right? It wasn't like he was like, okay, Queel, like, take off, like, run. Like, this was given before they even entered the Navarro, town, right? The city. So why wouldn't somebody who's as skilled and adept and knowing as Mando, who's clear, who's quote unquote legendary, why wouldn't he take that into account? I mean, that could be simply explained as a plot hole, because Lord knows that Star Wars is full of plot holes. But it just seems like something that he would have considered, especially given that there was time to consider that.
I don't think so, because Grief represented that the client had 4 stormtroopers with them, and that while there was an enhanced presence, they didn't understand the scope of the Imperial presence in Navarro. So they went in with bad intel, and if they had known that there was a heavy Imperial influence, they probably would have scrambled channels or done other preventative measures to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But they probably made a snap decision based upon the information that they had, and it didn't account for the number of Imperials that were there using old Imperial frequencies, because they're still current Imperial frequencies to those guys.
That is true.
So yes. Well, let's get into the issue of whether or not our favorite Ugnaught is either murdered or it was an attempted murder. Because I have hope that he's still alive. He was shot, but he was nestled up to Baby Yoda, and Baby Yoda healed him. Like, that's my hope, that we still get to hear Nick Nolte's voice as an Ugnaught, but that's me. Let's talk about
given your success with speaking IG-11 back into existence.
This is true.
I'm gonna rely on you as much as I think that Creel is dead. I am leaning on your hope.
Yeah, you're batting 1,000 right now, so.
Yeah, well, they need he needs to be undead so he can fly the Razor Crest and drop in IG-11 to help turn the tide with all those stormtroopers, because unless there's some more Mandalorians in hiding, they're going to need a few more guns in order to get out of this mess. But yeah, let's talk about. I think we can knock this out quickly. If he's dead, that's murder. If he's not dead, it's attempted murder.
Yeah.
Now, the other issue of, the speeder bike coming up, and, the biker doesn't even, like, slow down. He just grabs what could be the unconscious Baby Yoda. Gabby, is that kidnapping?
I think so. It's the unlawful taking of a person, here a child, which that obviously, as we've talked about before, implicates a whole lot of federal and state rules. But yes, it's the unlawful taking for a nefarious purpose and you have, kind of the transporting element. I mean, it's so callous that it almost seems like a football interception, right? He just, scoops Baby Yoda up and just keeps going. That he's not even pausing, as we saw with the other last attempted kidnapping of Baby Yoda. He didn't even have the time to make a dramatic speech to, allow somebody to save Baby Yoda. So yes, I think you're definitely, this stormtrooper has ticked all the boxes off of kidnapping, and so you definitely have that crime here.
Indeed. And
just general rudeness. I mean, why do people keep wanting to kidnap Baby Yoda?
Yeah, you gotta ruin my night or my morning like that.
Yeah.
He's the magical savior that can heal people, and he brings us all together. So there's plus we have to have a reason for the bad guys to be bad, and wanting to harm a cute, adorable child, that checks the boxes for being bad.
Yeah.
These are bad dudes.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, a lot there. A lot happened in this episode. And this is probably one of my favorite. I don't know if it's the favorite because so many of these are good, but this was a solid episode and the only cliffhanger out of all of them so far.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think after next week, I think we'll be looking at these 2 episodes as one long episode and treating it like that. Mm-hmm. So I fully expect, I love this episode. I fully expect to collectively say that 7 and 8 are my favorite from the whole season.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good prediction. The sin is still excellent, and again,
yeah.
So reason why she got the Kenobi series, and there's a lot there.
Although I'm a little concerned that the last episode is airing after Christmas and this episode ended on a cliffhanger. I'm very concerned for my Baby Yoda right now. I'm very concerned.
Yeah. It's going to be a long wait until season 2. And that's even assuming that they debut a single episode at Celebration. That's still 8 months. Long time to be in withdrawal from Baby Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
It's on demand. We can watch it whenever. There's plenty to look forward to. So
that's true.
again, first live action Star Wars, and we're loving it. And soon we'll get the Clone Wars to come back. And
very true.
Apparently, Cassian Andor is supposed to start filming, I think, in June. That's one of the things I've read, but I don't know if that's correct. So again, no shortage of awesome Star Wars content coming out, in addition to what we see with Rise of Skywalker. So future is bright. Mm-hmm. So with that, Gabby, I want to thank you for taking the laboring oar on the outline. This was exceptional research, so job well done.
Yay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is very awesome. Lots of great detail and legal analysis. So with that, we're on Patreon. We have lots of cool things coming up. Thank you all for tuning in.